Porque es mi culpa, os reclamo milagro doloroso.
Blasphemous is a very promising game that ultimately left me very disappointed. That was how I initially felt after beating my first playthrough, and not a great way to start off a video about a game I love, but alas, that's how it is sometimes. That feeling of seeing a game's potential but being let down by the flaws that held it back is a very upsetting feeling. It's even more so when you sense that you were very close to enjoying the game. Oh, if I only had one more hour with the game, it would have finally clicked. Well, after many hours, multiple playthroughs, and a 100% achievement completion, it finally did. So, how did despair turn into delight? Well, in this video, you'll find out. My experiences with Metroidvanias is scarce, and I don't have much experiences with the parents of that genre name either. I never really grew up playing either Castlevania or Metroid. So what drew me into Blasphemous? The answer? Dark Souls. The original Dark Souls is one of my favorite games to have released, and despite the tiresome comparisons, it is clear to see that it has had a huge impact on gaming as a whole. It's gone on to form its own genre. It was only natural for the indie scene to try and recapture that experience. Whether it may be games like Salt and Sanctuary, a title that wonderfully remakes Dark Souls into a 2D space, not only mimicking some of the essentials of any Souls game, but other features that you may not think would be part of the experience. Features such as an odd messaging system, weight affecting your roll speed, bloodstains showing how players have died, or even a local co-op experience. Then there are games such as Hollow Knight that lightly borrows some of Dark Souls' mannerisms and creates an experience that is entirely unique and original in its own way. What a lot of these games have in common is that they are Metroidvanias that feature Souls-like gameplay, whether it is significant or minor. Thus, we get a style of games named Soulsvanias, a term that wonderfully describes its experience. They are a wonderful pairing actually. Dark Souls 1 itself has elements that can be referred back to Metroidvanias. Whether it's the interconnected map that links back to Filing Shrine, exploration opening up shortcuts, or barriers that can only be unlocked when certain items are obtained. So how does Blasphemous fare? Blasphemous takes quite a bit from Dark Souls and gives it a garishly miserable Spanish Christianity aesthetic. There is a lot that the game does right, but I must first talk about the downsides. After all, this video is about how this dumb British woman's experience went from bollocks to brilliant. Ironically, the Metroidvania aspect of Blasphemous is quite dull. Backtracking is not one of my favorite things, and there is quite a lot of it. I can't really blame Blasphemous for this. It is part of the formula to backtrack in Metroidvanias. but it is a factor I dislike, and it's no different in Blasphemous. The platforming is not very fun either. In fact, it is quite awkward. Let it be of note that I do not enjoy platforming in games in general. The precision needed to traverse multiple platforms is a skill I lack. Blasphemous isn't the most horrendous with its platforming, however it has moments where it just doesn't work as well as it could. It is difficult to describe what makes the platforming so awkward, but my best guess comes down to two factors: how frame specific it is and how pixel perfect some segments are. The first issue is most evident when trying to climb ladders. If you aren't in a specific frame and position for the game to register that you are trying to climb a ladder, you'll simply fall, and in certain cases you'll die. The pixel-perfect traversal is most apparent in Graveyard of the Peaks. This area features wooden walls that you use to climb. The gimmick of this area is that there is wind that alternatively blows left and right, requiring you to use that wind to blow you forward. There is one specific wall that has a margin of error so small that if you are not pixel-perfect, you will be punished severely. You'll just plummet all the way down to the bottom to do it again. It's not that bad on its own, but when you factor in that you have to wait for the wind to blow in the right direction, it can add up to time being wasted. You've heard of stun locking, right? It's a mechanic that needs no introduction. You hit the thing and the thing is stuck in a state of immobility. It can either be a wonderful feature or a horrible feature, and in this case, it's horrible. Pretty horrible. Sadly, Blasphemous has those enemies, and areas that are dedicated to them, in fact. Take the Library of the Negated Words, for instance. The gimmick of that area is that there are ghosts that go visible and invisible, and they alternate between the two. Of course, when they are visible, they can hit you. The area has some of the most crappy enemy placement I've seen as well. Just have a look at this clip. The other example is the Wall of the Holy Prohibitions. This area has the worst enemy in the game. I despise them quite a bit. If they get lucky, they can put you in a loop where you are constantly stun-locked over and over. Yeah, this area kind of sours the experience in the later half of the game. Is it game-breaking? No, not really. You will be able to progress with enough brute force, but I can't deny it's frustrating. The general combat in the game is quite boring as well, with a lack of interesting movement upgrades and interesting combat upgrades. The combat gets kind of formulaic after a while. At the time of this video, I had recently come off of Hollow Knight, and the amount of movement and combat options you are given in that game is wonderful. Sure, it takes a while to get them all, but once you do, the freedom you get in combat is just great. It's so much fun. But that is pretty much all of my gripes with Blasphemous. So how about some positives? Because there are a lot of positives. One of the major positives that Blasphemous has is its wonderful realization of aesthetic. It's a brilliant showcase of Spanish folklore and imagery. The visual art for the game is strong both thematically and technically. Pixel art is a very popular choice for indie games, whether it may be the cost of production or the evoking of a particular era of gaming. It can be a great aesthetic choice. but if done right, it can stand out amongst others and be unique in its own right. The Game Kitchen, developers of Blasphemous, fully realized the style they wanted to go with and excellently show it through gorgeous pixel art. It evokes Castlevania through and through. It oozes extravagance and lushness. It's a Renaissance painting in motion. Speaking of paintings, have a look at this one. The painting shown here is Condenados por la Inquisición, created by 𝗂𝗛𝗨𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 video. I am sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. I hope it was okay enough. Anyways, look at the painting. Notice the color palette, the impressionistic strokes, the contrast of shadow and light. That care for detail and richness is carried over from the painting into the game. That evocation of Spanish Inquisition era paintings is very much prevalent in the aesthetic of the game. It's just simply excellent work. That care for translating Spanish history is not only in its art, but in the game's lore. Take Our Lady of the Charred Visage, for instance. She is inspired by Maria Corneille, a noble lady. In 1334, she lost her husband Juan de la Creda and her father Alfonso to a beheading by King Pedro I of Castile. The king desired for Maria, and so Maria fled from the king and sought refuge in the convent of Santa Clara to become a nun. However, the king insisted. To rid herself of her beauty, she poured hot oil on her face. Sounds pretty metal if you ask me. There are more examples of Spanish folklore inspiring the lore of Blasphemous, but for the sake of brevity, I shall link a video in the description made by the Lore Hunter on this subject, if you are interested. The bow that ties the game's aesthetic all together is the sense of misery and sorrow woven throughout the game, one that is quite oppressive and paints this gloom over the history of its setting. The lore features a lot of that misery too. Take the mysterious event in the land of Cvstodia referred to as the miracle. It's a will beyond comprehension, and is sometimes referred to as the sorrowful miracle or the grievous miracle. It manifests in often cruel ways, either as a blessing or a curse. It's the reason enemies are presented the way they are throughout the game, twisted and morphed. This power was first shown in the first miracle, a very important event in the history of Cvstodia. Throughout the game you see this mysterious symbol that looks like an 8. This is in reference to the Twisted One, an important figure of worship in Cvstodia. The Twisted One was a young man filled with guilt who prayed to the high wills for punishment, to ease that guilt in his heart. The log he sat on twisted around his body in a cruel manner, yet he never complained or cried. That man can be seen in the game, though as a tree, and that tree can be found in the churches of the Mother of Mothers. It is a very fascinating tidbit of the game's lore, evoking the misery of Blasphemous through and through. I won't delve further into the lore of the game, but I encourage you to do so in your own time. A content creator by the name of SmoughTown has videos that go into the lore of Blasphemous, and if you are interested, I'll have them linked in the description. No good game is complete without a good soundtrack, and my gosh is the soundtrack good. The music is simply amazing, and just like what was previously discussed, evokes the style of Blasphemous wonderfully. It's glamorous and lush and wondrous, while equally being dreary and dark and depressing. The music is primarily flamenco, Spanish folk music. That flamenco is built on with notes of orchestral music, pun intended. Elements of post-rock are also present, and all of those genres combined form the music of Blasphemous. Have a listen to this piece, for instance. It has those Spanish roots that paint the setting of the game, as well as touches of electric guitar and gloomy synths, all combined with an orchestral feel. This gives off that darkish tone that reflects the misery of the game. It is music that embodies Cvstodia. As mentioned before, the miracle twists and morphs, thus we have designs for all these characters that are weird and creepy, and just overall excellent. The bosses especially look great. There is one feature I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the boss fights in this game, which I could gush about, and I am totally going to gush about right now. The best part of any game is its boss fights, and Blasphemous is no exception. The boss fights in this game are incredibly fun, and was one of the major reasons I stayed with the game and gave it another chance. Not only are they visually interesting, they are fairly challenging, and make some of the game's shortcomings worthwhile. The best kinds of fights in this game were surprisingly the human-like ones, not because of their size, but because of how they felt. While all were great to fight, some stick out more than others, and it was the human-like foes that were the most engaging. With bosses like 𝗂𝙂𝙢𝙢 and Our Lady of the Charred Visage, the effective method to kill them was the use of prayer, and if built right, you could even cheese them. Badly done boss cheesing aside, it shows the shortcoming of these bosses. Because of their size, you spend a fair amount of time moving around the level trying to hit their weak spots, and prayers are effective at cutting down the traversal and just providing instant damage at a relatively comfortable spot. Using a prayer also provides some invincibility frames that allow you to skip certain attacks instead of just using skill to avoid them. However, there are some faults with a few of the bosses which make this strategy more viable. Take Our Lady of the Charred Visage, for example. She has one specific attack that has an extremely tight window in which you can dodge, that I feel is unfair for the average player, especially in the third phase of her boss fight where she introduces a second hand. Of course, boss cheesing is avoidable, and if you are so inclined you can beat the bosses without using a single prayer, and at the end of the day it's just nitpicking. Why I find the human bosses more engaging is simply due to the fact that they make you utilize almost every part of Blasphemous' gameplay. These fights are like dances, a clashing of swords. You parry and dodge and slide your way around, trying to avoid every ounce of damage you can, whilst returning with fatal blows of your own, be it through prayers or through your sword. The combat system that I had initially called boring is actually perfect for the boss fights, very well suited. There is enough tools and versatility as well as customization to personalize your fighting style. There are two systems at play that further your personalization, the rosary beads and the mea culpa hearts. The rosary beads can provide perks that help you should you be struggling with certain things. Are you low on health? Use the health wax beads. Want to regenerate more forever with attacks? Embers of the Broken Star can help you with that. The mea culpa system is also a great addition, providing a huge benefit at the exchange of a major downside. Take the Heart of Oils for instance. It's a mea culpa heart that provides extra damage at the cost of being more vulnerable, so if you're particularly good at dodging and not taking damage, it's a great heart to have. Or alternatively, you could build around it. Pick the Heart of Oils as your sword core, and then choose the rosary beads that negate certain damage, or all of them actually. If you find the items that unlock all of your rosary bead slots, then you can come up with some interesting combinations to make quite an interesting build. Whether you are a sword-only purist or a prayer-heavy user, you can build yourself around the playstyle you want to play and hone it further with these systems. In terms of the base game, that's pretty much all I have to say. The initial shortcomings were frustrating, but not enough to push me away from the game, and thus I gave it a second chance. And as you can clearly see, I have a lot to love with this game. I however haven't touched on the game's free expansion, The Stir of Dawn, and it's thanks to that expansion that I truly loved the game. And I think it needs some attention of its own. The Stir of Dawn is a very solid addition to the base game, adding new lore, new items, new bosses, new game plus, new gameplay modifiers, and some quality of life improvements. Let's get the smallest changes out of the way. The new improvements are very welcome. The two additions that I find worth noting is the Spanish voice language option and the ability to teleport via shrines. I love the Spanish dialogue, like it adds so much immersion to the game, further adding to the Spanish flair of Cvstodia. It's a really solid addition. Like, I tried a bit of the English voice acting and it was okay, but the Spanish is just adds something more to the game. If for some reason you stumbled upon this video and haven't played Blasphemous, I strongly recommend you play the game for the first time in Spanish. The other major feature is the ability to teleport via shrines. This is a huge change, a very huge change. In the base game, I criticized the backtracking you had to do, because the teleport rooms mostly were in bad places. There was a fair amount of running you had to do, and it just padded the game out unnecessarily. The ability to teleport from shrine to shrine is really welcome, and I appreciate the Game Kitchen for adding this. If you'd like to know how to unlock this, just donate 20,000 Tears of Atonement to the church in 𝗟𝗪𝗡. A nice little bonus is when you rest at a shrine, your forever bar fills up to max. Some other additions include a redone map that is more pixel accurate, a prayer cost rework to balance out the very powerful ones, and a little doggo in 𝗟𝗪𝗡 to pet, because even penitents love a good boy. Arguably, one of the biggest additions is the New Game Plus mode titled True Torment. When you start a New Game Plus run, you keep all your players, relics, rosary beads, mea culpa hearts, and abilities. You also receive an item that allows you to access an important NPC from the DLC to unlock all the bosses. As you'd expect, all enemies deal more damage compared to the initial playthrough. In your New Game Plus playthrough, you can now select one of 3 gameplay modifiers, or penitents, as they are called. The first and most fun penitence is the Penitence of Bleeding Heart. It changes 2 things, the way bio flasks work and your health system. It changes it from a health bar to life orbs. Think of them as the masks in Hollow Knight. Each orb represents a chance. Deplete all your chances and you die. The bio flasks now regenerate orbs over time, rather than all of them immediately. You get the first orb instantaneously, and the rest regenerate over time. Taking any damage while the regeneration occurs will stop the healing. The final change is that enemies respawn every time you return to an area. The final change is kind of negligible. The real fun is the way the health works. Arguably, this is one of the strongest of the 3 modifiers, especially if you know how to build for it. But what makes it so strong? Well, it comes down to how it changes the amount of damage you take. In the base game, attacks take away a percentage of health, and depending on how strong the attack is, you lose more health. But with this penitence, each attack does one orb, no matter what it is. If it's a strong attack, a weak attack, or attack, question mark? Anyways, it does one orb of damage. This means that you could tank a ton of damage, like a lot of damage. This also affects a certain mea culpa heart, the heart of oils. Where you would normally take a ton of damage, you instead just take one health orb. So it's essentially a free upgrade to damage. But it isn't just easy mode, it demands more from the player. Knowing how to avoid as much damage as possible will guarantee that every bile flask you use is effective. At the time of writing, I think it is perhaps a little bit broken. I think the Heart of Oils needs a rework of sorts so that it doesn't just provide a free damage upgrade to Bleeding Heart users. Other than that, I think the Bleeding Heart penitence is the most balanced and the most fun out of the three. The second penitence of the three is the penitence of unwavering faith. It trades sword combat for more prayer usage. Your sword attacks are half as effective, but your fervor regenerates over time. The downside is that taking damage makes you lose a portion of your fervor. Aside from the near limitless supply of fervor, I think this penitence is a tad bit dull, as it's not really that different from the base game, except that you're just using more prayers. With that being said, it is good fun to spam prayers, so make of that what you will. The final penitence is the penitence of true guilt, perhaps the most challenging of the three. Upon death, you lose all of your tears of atonement, leaving them behind in a guilt fragment, at the place you last were before you died. The guilt fragment is also at its maximum level, meaning that if you were to die again, all of those tears you collected will be lost. Think of it like the bloodstains in Dark Souls, and it makes more sense. The harshest change is your bile flasks. They no longer heal you, and instead fill up your fervor. I can see what the intent was here. It truly tests a player's skill, especially during bosses. Perfection is the key. However, I think it could use some work, like maybe a bit of work. For instance, perhaps maybe a way of getting health back that is high risk and high reward. We could do some theory crafting, but I'll just leave it at that. In my honest opinion, I think it is probably the least fun of the three. That could just be me being terrible, so take it with a grain of salt. I do think I might have to replay that penitence at some point. If I feel interested enough at some point, I might do a follow-up video theory crafting all the different new gameplay modifiers that could be added in the future. The new additions are wonderful, but no story expansion is complete without some new foes, and in the Stir of Dawn, we have the 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 I mentioned the best kinds of bosses in the base game were the ones that utilized nearly all of what was available to the player. Using all the tools at your disposal to take down these foes is a very rewarding experience. And I think the Game Kitchen agrees with that, because the 𝗂𝗚𝙨 are exactly what I was hoping for. I adore these bosses. They are great in almost every way. And I think it's safe to say that these are by far the most memorable bosses in the game to date. None of the shortcomings in the base game's boss roster are present here, and everything is just balanced accordingly. What these bosses provide is a dance, a back and forth, as you bob and weave through their attacks, only to return with some blows of your own. Attacks are well choreographed and very fair. Unlike a boss such as Our Lady of the Charred Visage, where they have one specific attack that is near impossible to dodge. The 𝗂𝗚𝙨 are also a fair bit flexible. Certain attacks have different methods of approach. You can jump over them or slide past them, but you can also parry them. Certain attacks provide small openings where you can add a little extra damage in if you are quick enough. It's all on how you wish to tackle them. Do you want to be safe, or do you want to be aggressive? Despite the recoloring of the bosses, that does not overstate how wonderful they are in terms of their iconography and fights. The moves theme them and define them, and each 𝗂𝗚𝙨 is wonderful in its own right. I have a hard time picking a favorite, so thankfully the game solves that for me by just combining all of the bosses into one giant mega boss. Behold 𝗂𝗪𝙨, the best boss fight in Blasphemous to date. It combines the moveset of the previous 4 𝗂𝗚𝙨s and cycles through them, testing all of your skill and knowledge of the previous 4 fights. It is by far the most engaging dance between player and boss. That is very tightly knit and ever so engaging. However, no dance is complete without its music to back it, and the soundtrack for the bosses is just great. I mean, the soundtrack of the expansion only contains 2 songs, one of which has 4 different variations for each 𝗂𝗚𝙨, and it's just so good. What a brilliant DLC this has been. I think I've said pretty much all I have to say about how wonderful Blasphemous is. If you take anything from this video, I want it to be that your feelings on games can change, and it is up to you to give that game that you were disappointed with another chance. Maybe it just wasn't the right time to enjoy it, and perhaps your opinion may change. If you stumbled across this video and still haven't picked up Blasphemous, I urge you to do so, especially with the expansion adding some much needed features. Thank you for watching this video, and take care.